Hi everyone and welcome to this 50-minute tutorial on how to paint cats' eyes in pastel. Now, I always find cats really tricky to paint. I don't know why I find them harder than dogs, but their eyes especially are so difficult. So I hope that you enjoy seeing how I build these up, and I really took my time on them, so I hope you find this useful. If you're just discovering my work here on YouTube, do subscribe to me here and have a look through all my other playlists for lots of other instructional videos on pastel and lots more to do with being a professional artist. And also consider checking out my Patreon channel, where you'll find lots more instructional videos, much more like this one, more in-depth videos. So enjoy this tutorial. So you can see that I've already built up a bit of the surrounding areas around the eyes, mostly the top of the head, and I also try to create some of that fur around the eyes before beginning on the eyes. I know a lot of artists start with eyes first, and I totally get that because it's usually a really enjoyable part of the painting. I just find it difficult to make sure that I've got the eyes placed correctly and the shape of the eyes. I find it much easier to judge all of that once I've got a little bit of the fur in around the eyes. But each to their own, everybody works in a different order. I don't always work in the best order. It's literally just how you feel things as you go along. So the first thing I do is come in with that lovely Unison green. And it's pretty close to the colour of the cat's eye, you can see. So I can block in a little bit of that. And then I'm using the pastel pencils just to work on the outline of the eyeball. The thing I've got to be most careful with cat's eyes is really getting the shape of the eyes correct. The slightest little millimetre out and I find that I instantly lose the likeness in the face. So it's a real struggle just to get every little angle just right on a cat's eye. And I'm working from a slight 3/4 angle here, and that makes it a little trickier. It's always harder to get eyes when you're at this slight 3/4 view. So I really take my time looking constantly at the photo reference. Just starting to soften the edges, bring a little bit of darkness in from the edges. Just like anything else that I paint, it's all about the light and the shade. So I still like to use my bigger, soft pastels. And I start to add a few of those highlighted areas, especially that little rim of highlight just around the pupil. And that's going to really help the pupil itself pop. Working on Pastelmat paper, and I find that it's really nice and easy to blend the colours together on Pastelmat paper. It mixes really well. But at this stage I'm not too worried about getting the marks in exactly the right place, because there's a certain amount of tidying and tweaking that I will do with the pastel pencils. So I'm really just blocking in at this stage, trying to get a feel for the main overall colour. But usually with eyes on any animal or even in my people portraits, I'm often relying on those pastel pencils to really bring it together. So in with the soft pastels first. But I find those sharp points on the pencils really useful. And at this stage, it just looks like I'm fiddling a bit, really. But I'm paying really close attention to my photo reference. I'm not letting myself get carried away with the detail in the eye too soon. Studying the photo reference, trying to get every little curve and corner just right. And with my white pastel pencil, just starting to shape where the main reflections will go on this eyeball. Sometimes I'll come in with a little shard of white soft pastel. But in this case, I'm just using that fine point on the pencil. And it doesn't have a very dark colour to cover over. The green is quite light here. So I'm using the pastel pencil just to really precisely get that reflection in. And there's a lovely window reflection. The window's just to the left of Baxter the cat. And I love placing animals next to windows for their portraits, as you often get that really satisfying reflection on the eyeball. So just using one of my paper tortillons, it's just a little stump with points at the end. Just using it to blend and create a bit of a harder outline on the reflections. A useful tool for when your fingertip is just a little bit too big for the job. So also bringing in some touches of brown. There's a lot of warmth in Baxter's eyes. So really looking for as many colours as I can see on the eyeball. On this scale, it's not going to be possible to paint absolutely every little fleck that I can see in the photo reference. So I've just got to judge how much detail I really need in here on this scale to get the effect. One tip if you're looking to get really nice reflections in eyes, you don't necessarily want to have an outline around your reflection, but you certainly do want to have really good contrast between the sharp edge of your reflection and the background colour. So sometimes I will come in with a colour that's a little bit darker and really give those edges of the reflection a good sharp line. So the trickiest part of a cat's eye, I think anyway, is this pupil, and it's such an unusual shape. You've got a long slither of a diamond shape in the middle of cat's eyes. And again, when painting from the 3/4 angle, that pupil looks like a really unusual shape and sitting at quite a strange angle. And you can see in the photo reference that Baxter is kind of looking upwards. And it really is tricky once you start to fill in that pupil to get a sense of him looking upwards. I always find people's eyes, even dogs' eyes, so much easier with a round shaped pupil. So I've really got to concentrate when I'm painting cat's eyes. And again, using my black pastel pencil just to firm up the outline of the eyeball. And really slowly fill in the shape of that pupil. Again, I'm spending as much time looking at the photo reference as I am at my own painting. Really comparing the two. And once I've got a few layers of the soft pastel on the eye, you can see I can start to make some more little detailed marks with my pastel pencil. You'll also notice that there's a big difference between both of Baxter's eyes. So this eye on the left as we look is very much in daylight. It's really being hit by the light that's coming in through the window. So it's a lovely bright green eye. And although I actually did lighten my photo reference a little bit on the other side in the shadow, you'll see that when I come to work on the other eye, that it's quite a different tonal quality, a lot darker on the other eye. So that's one thing you've got to notice when you're painting eyes, is one of them catching the light more than the other. It's not always a simple case of just using all the same colours to create both eyes. So you really got to look for that direction of light. But most of what I'm doing here is really trying to firm up the outline of the eye. Even when I think I've got it sketched in really precisely at the beginning, I've always got so many changes to make on a cat's eye as I work on it. I find it's quite easy to make a cat look a little bit cross or stern sometimes, just with the slightest little millimetre being off. So I spend extra long on cats' eyes just to try and get the expression right. And Baxter is my sister's cat. This was a birthday gift for my sister. So I know this cat quite well, and I know that he's a big, lovable softie of a thing. And he posed so beautifully for me, so I felt I really wanted to do his soft nature full justice in this portrait. I do remember painting a cat commission quite early on in my career as an artist. One of those times that you really should have said no to the commission. It was a very kind, thoughtful gift from a husband to his wife, but he had failed to mention that he disliked the cat very much, and the cat disliked him very much, and it was him who decided to take the photographs of the cat for his portrait. So this cat looks particularly angry in the photo reference that I get to paint from, because it's obviously sitting giving the evil eye to the husband who, well, they just don't get along. So I ended up with very difficult photo reference to work from. And I think it's one of the few times that I've had a commission not go down very well. I think the wife just didn't recognise her lovely, friendly cat in the portrait, because I didn't have the lovely friendly cat to work from in the photo reference. So always be careful when you're taking on pet commissions that you're getting a photo from your client which really sums up the animal. I mean, if you can't see the animal's character in the photo reference, you've got no chance of capturing it in the painting. You've really only got your photo reference to go from. So make sure that you've got the best quality images, or if not, at least make sure that the photos show the true character of the animal, that you can really see their personality. So I've learned from many lessons in the past working on pet commissions. I think it's a wonderful job I think it's quite a tough job being any kind of portrait artist. But I know that it has certainly improved my skills over the years as I've been given so many different and varied challenges. So it's good to challenge yourself. But my main advice to anyone taking on pet portrait commissions is really strive for better photo reference to work from. Give yourself the best chance possible to capture someone's pet. Of course, sometimes it's not possible to get better photo reference, and you feel that you want to make an effort for your client and really try to produce something for them. But it's a slippery slope sometimes. Sometimes you do yourself a lot of harm by doing that. It can really knock your confidence when a portrait doesn't turn out as well as you'd hoped, and sometimes it's not entirely your fault. So definitely my advice to try and give yourself good challenges to work on. There's only so much we can do as artists with what we're given. So try and give yourself the best chance of producing your best work. But this eye is starting to come together. I'm trying to think of little bits of detail that I can add, that I can see in the photo reference. Extra little bits of subtle reflection. But again, I'm not into painting absolutely every little speck that I can see on the eyeball. If this piece were 20 inches big, then I would have an opportunity to go into a lot more detail on the eyes. But this piece was only 12 by 10 inches, so we're talking about quite a small piece. This month on my Patreon channel, it's going to be an entire cat month, and there will be lots more full-length tutorials showing the entire build-up of Baxter's fur, as that was also quite a challenge. Not only do I find cats' eyes difficult, but I also find their fur really difficult. It seems to be about 2 or 3 times more dense than most dog furs. So lots and lots of layers. And lots of patience. But that's eye number 1 just about complete, and I'll take you through the second eye now. So a nice sharp black pastel pencil. And at this stage I don't even have the eye really well outlined. And you can see that there's a lot of darkness around the edges of this eye, slightly more in shadow just on the other side of the nose, tucked in out of the light a little bit. So I start the process by firming up that outline with my black. So I spend the next couple of minutes just using that black pastel pencil, and I'll speed a little bit of this up ever so slightly just to get us through this section. I'll join back in when I've got some colour. So now I've got a good bit of that darkness added to the inside rims of the eye. And I'm just going to, before I add any colour to the actual eyeball, pick out that lower rim of the eye. It's just as important as those black lines surrounding the eye, as it really shapes the bottom part of the eye. And I'm using BV7 here, something a little cooler. You can see the contrast between this colour and the bright white over to the left of the cat, where we're getting direct sunlight. But that's just enough then to make a start on the actual eyeball. And again, it's that same yellowy green. Really a perfect colour for a lot of cats' eyes, this colour. But I also quite like the colour of paper that I'm working on for this piece. It's a nice ground colour with a lot of warmth. The last thing I wanted with Baxter's, well, both his eyes and his coat, was to make him seem really cold and grey, as he's such a warm coloured cat, so didn't want it to end up looking cold, which is why I chose a nice warm colour paper to work on. It really does help. I've got a whole video on my YouTube channel talking about how to choose a good colour of pastel paper for different subject matters, so do check that out. So unlike last time, I'm coming in quite early, just marking in both the pupil and the two reflections. And I can afford to do that with the black pastel pencil just lightly, because it's much darker on this eyeball. And I also come in with a much stronger brown. Just going a little bit deeper and darker than on the first eye. And I make a use of some brown pastel pencil there as well, you can see. Just using that brown pastel pencil to move some of that soft pastel pigment that I've just applied. So I'm not always looking to put a lot of pigment on the paper from my pastel pencils. Sometimes I'm literally just moving the pigment around that I've already applied to the paper. So choose a similar colour to what I've applied and then use the pastel pencils to tweak that. And again, constantly coming back in with the black pastel pencil. Every time I come in and I'm a little more sure of my outline and of the general shape of things, then I'm leaning a little bit harder each time, really trying to create the darkest black areas. But again, like with the first one, I'm back and forth between the outline and the colour of the actual eyeball, just moving it ever so slightly when I come back in, like here, just trying to get the curve of the eyeball where it comes up from the inner corner up to the top of the eye. Really focusing on the outline shape at this stage. So you can see how much of this is just me taking my time, keeping one eye on the photo reference. Usually before I commit to the pupil of an eye or the reflections of an eye, I'll really focus on that outline first of all, trying to get the overall shape correct, as if you add the pupil too soon and you don't have the outline quite right, then it's going to be very hard to fix it or see where the problem lies. So one challenge at a time for me. Make sure I've got the outer boundaries of the eye in place first. And only once I'm happy with that, then I'll start working on the tonal values within the eye, as well as those reflections and the pupil. So just brightening that lower rim a little bit. I can see as it comes out of the corner of the eye, it's a little bit duller. And as it gets up towards the outer corner of the eye, then you can really see where the light catches that lower rim. And again, I'm starting to look for little bits of reflected colour just in around the pupil. So it's not quite as harsh as an outline as it gets softened in, but I suppose the idea really is to sort of outline the pupil with a light colour so that the darkness of the pupil stands out. And then I suppose when I think about it, I've done the opposite with the reflections. I sort of outline those with a darker colour so that they really pop and stand out. Apologies for any heavy breathing in this video. I have 3 dogs lying around my feet and they're all doing a bit of snoring and heavy breathing, so I promise it's not me. But I have a miniature dachshund doing some very loud snoring at the moment. So working really slowly, resisting the temptation to add the pupil in or the reflections in too soon. I think the most satisfying part of a whole painting sometimes has got to be that reflection on an eyeball. The painting can look so dead until the moment you add that little speck of reflection, and all of a sudden it's alive and looking back at you. So I never rush that moment, I savour it. Like a lot of artists, I do love painting eyes. And just slightly feathering that outer edge of the black outline. I don't want it to appear a really hard line. You can see where the fur comes around the top of the eye, and there's a little jagged edge from the fur. So for the next couple of minutes, I'm just adding further little bits of detail to the eyeball using my pastel pencils. Then I'll come back in and chat about that pupil when I make a start on it. So finally, starting to mark in the second pupil. A dodgy moment because I want them both to match. I want the cat to not look cross-eyed, but have that upward glance that I can see in the photo reference. So again, just taking my time, plotting that shape in, looking at the angle of it in comparison to the other angles around the eye. And that's why I like to be sure about the outline of the eye first, as I'm going to use those angles to judge this center diamond off. And if my other angles are wrong, then it's going to make it very tricky. So I'm really judging how far down the eyeball the bottom point of this pupil comes, how it curves up slightly towards the right. Just having a close look at every angle of the pupil. And I can shape it a little bit from the other side using my lighter colours as well. So I'm careful not to put too much of the black down. I've always got room to come back in and tweak and adjust. So it's not a diamond shape as we would see it from straight on. You can see how it just curves up and around the eyeball from this angle. And again, wanting to be sure that I bring in little touches of warmth. When I look really closely at Baxter's eyes, it's not just green I can see in there. Look out for little warm splashes of browns, brown earths, as well as those yellowy highlights. So now the fun part, we get to add those lovely reflections onto the eyeball. And they'll stand out particularly well on this eye because they're shining out from a much darker space. So again, with the pastel pencil, just for a bit of accuracy here, as I really wanted to get the curve of the window panes. Leaning quite heavily with the white pastel pencil. Really squishing some of that pigment onto the paper. And then, as before, I can come back in and work the shape of them from the other side, while also creating a little bit of a dark outline around the reflection. And you can see how that just makes those reflections pop. But if you study most eyes, whether it's human or animal, you'll often see that the edge of the reflection is really well contrasted, quite often with a little bit of a darker outline. So it doesn't look so bad now that I've got both eyes in. They at least both appear to be looking in the same direction, which is a bonus. Throughout this piece though, I have to say I did come back in and make other little tweaks just to the shape of the pupil, especially on both eyes. So I think I came back to this piece the following day and spotted a couple of little areas like I'm doing here, just expanding the size of the pupil ever so slightly changing the angle of one little area ever so slightly. So really, really small tweaks from here on in. I've got the basis of it down now. And sometimes it's just hard to know when to stop. I often find that a good deadline is helpful for that. But if you're working on a good pastel paper that can take many, many layers, it is often hard to know when enough is enough. I especially find that on Pastelmat paper because it just accepts so much detail and so many layers of pastel, which is a great thing, but sometimes I've got to say that's it. So just final little bits of detail now, trying to pick out any little specks of light that I can add. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and that you find it helpful. Next time you've got to paint some feline eyes. I'll be back soon with some more cat tutorials, as I feel that's an area I would really like to work on more myself. Next cat I would like to attempt would be a nice tabby type of cat, something with a nice tabby coat. And that's been requested a lot from my patrons over on Patreon, so that will hopefully be the next cat tutorials that I produce. But for now, I hope you've enjoyed this, and until next time, happy pasteling.